Hi, this is the new Roland TR8-S drum machine. This is the latest addition to my gigging kit, and the reason I've bought this is to get rid of drum racks in Ableton and the Arturia BeatStep Pro. These two in combination live used to give me a few problems, so I've gone laptopless now, and in doing so this replaces those two items. This is quite an interesting device in that it's very flexible. The front panel layout is extremely ergonomic. You've got individual faders for each of the instruments, which is now standard. We have three knobs here. The top one is a tune, which allows you to raise the pitch of the instrument. The next one down is a decay, so you can change the length of each of the samples or each of the drum sounds. And the bottom one is user definable as a control knob, and you can set that in the control system on the right here. Each of the patterns can have 8 variations, A to H, with which are these buttons down here, and you can chain these together. So if you want to have alternate drum parts, for example, you can have the two different variations. When you play back, if you press both buttons together, it will alternate between the two patterns as one finishes. You can fill these right the way up, and you can do all sorts of things. On the right here you have a velocity pad, which will give you a velocity for each of the highlighted instruments. So for example, on the snare, if I select the snare and hit this, you can hit this softly or hit this hard, and that will actually encode your velocity into the slots. If you don't do that, you can have the standard, just push the button, you can have the standard velocity, which will put all of them at the same velocity, which is fine if you want a traditional sounding drum machine. That works fine, and the velocity gives you that little bit extra control. Each of the instruments has its own fader, so the good thing about this is you can control the volume of the kit overall. There's a master effects, there's a master reverb, there's an auto fill-in, which is quite interesting. You can set this to fill in after so many bars, or you can trigger it manually. What type of fill-in it has, you can define yourself again within the control part on the right here. Would have been nice if each of these buttons was velocity sensitive like the BeatStep Pro, because one of the great things about this instrument is if you press instant play, you can finger drum all of the instruments completely free will, and if there's a pattern running in the background, that pattern will still run and won't interfere with it, but on its own, you can hear, you can so if you wanted to write a MIDI part, this has conventional MIDI outs. It would have been really great if each one of these buttons was velocity sensitive rather than just that pad. Also on the instant play, you can put in rolls and you can put in defined fills and do one or two other things. Writing a pattern with this is pretty much the same as the TR8 and most other drum machines. You select your instrument, put in where you want your beat to be, and build up your rhythm from that point onwards. What I would say about this is you can make your own kit. There are all the kits from all the Roland drum machines are actually come with this machine, as do a huge number of samples, including industrial samples. There are vocal samples in here, there are synthesizer samples in here, with which there are chords and there are actual notes as well, all of which can be assigned freely to any of the instruments at the top. You can also import your own samples and build your own kit up. When you build your own kit up, you can mix and match from any of the kits that come with the machine, and also with any instruments that you sample in for yourself. I'll give you an example here. This is a kit I defined for a particular piece of ours, and in this piece here, I actually made all the sounds on an MS-20 and just simply loaded them in. This would traditionally run into drum racks. And you can hear the sounds that I created specifically for this purpose. What I would say is, it's an important thing here, when you save the pattern, make sure you save the kit with it. And saving with this is a bit strange. You have to save the pattern in a conventional way by pressing right, but also you need to edit that pattern to save the kit with it. If you don't, what will happen is when you turn the machine on again, it would have saved your pattern but not the kit, so you'll get the default TR808 rather than the kit that you've carefully put together for that particular song. So that's worth bearing in mind. There are over 90 kits that come with this of various forms, and you can go on creating another 60, 70, 80 of your own. So there's plenty of space for moving around. I think you can also overwrite the originals if you run out of space. And as with all these things, you can always restore to the factory settings if you end up doing that and you really wish you hadn't. Downsides is, apart from having, it would have been nice to have velocity pads on all the instruments, the saving and the loading is, as I say, a little bit strange, and I think they could have done better here in the actual user interface. Other things that I think are missing are an arrangement window. As I mentioned earlier, you can set these variations to alternate between the different patterns, but as you've got 8 possible variations, if we had an arrangement window, we could probably build up something much more complex, much easier, being able to physically see which pattern is going to follow which pattern, and therefore we'd have been able to create a complete song. And that to me is the bit that's missing, and maybe a firmware update could solve this. The effects are quite good. The effects are quite nice. The reverb isn't at all bad. You've got a standard clocked delay, which is useful. I don't know if you can turn the clock off. That's something I've not explored yet. If I show you the reverb, if I put, now turn the reverb up. As you can hear, that gets quite boomy. There's a master effects here which allows you to do some interesting things, because there are a few other effects in here. So you can turn up both the reverb and the delay at the same time. It's actually quite effective and quite useful. And also, of course, the master effects will affect everything coming out of the kit at the same time. You can also put different reverbs on the different instruments as well, which is actually quite nice. One other thing which I've not tried yet is there's a motion sequencer in this that will record any knob adjustments you make and play those back with the pattern. That can be particularly useful with the tuning knob, because you can then get a lot of different variations out of one instrument just by being able to sequence where this tuning knob is. So this, for example, at the moment has a filter on it. And I think there's also a fair few other effects that you can assign to that as well. The reverb is likewise can be set between either affecting the whole unit, as I think you can affect individual instruments and then save them as part of the kit. There's also an accent button which allows you one instrument to be particularly pronounced over the others, which is quite effective. Turn that on. with careful use, this can be really useful. The other really great thing is, unlike the BeatStep Pro, is I can put tuplets into this. They call them subnotes. So if I were to take a particular note in the pattern, for example, let's say number 8 on the bass drum, if I press sub and this note down together, I can then choose between splitting that note in half, by a third, or by a quarter. So if you do it by a third, you'll get a triplet in there, which can be really seriously useful for making some really interesting sounds. So if I solo this out. Okay, so that's lit up yellow. That means that that's where the substep's going to be on that particular beat. It will now divide that beat into 3, which will give you this effect. Which then becomes really quite a useful device. You can also put individual steps throughout the pattern. So on number 5, for example, I can press sub again, but this time I'll put 4. So this one here, number 5, we can then divide by 4. So we'll have division by 4 and division by 3, and it will sound like this. And of course we can do that with any of the individual instruments, which allows us to build up some really nice complex rhythms. This also combines with being able to do a last step. This enables each of the instruments to have their own bar length. If we now choose a normal kit, you'll be able to really appreciate how this can really work. Okay, so here we have 4 nice bass drum hits. Okay, if we put a snare in, let's say here, maybe here, and let's say we've got some toms. Good old-fashioned hand clap at number 8. We've got close hi-hats and open hi-hats. We have some close hi-hats. Now, if I press last step, if I were to take one of these instruments, let's say the snare, and I press last step, at the moment none of them are lit, so if I don't put 8, means to say that when the pattern gets to number 8, it will then restart to the beginning. So the other patterns are 16 steps long, but this one I've set to 8 steps long. So that snare will now repeat in a different place each time, because as that's going to 8 and back to 1, that's repeated. That's now playing twice what the 16 were. You can use any of these steps, so you can build up really strange and interesting rhythms. If we look at the low toms, we've got at number 8 and number 10. If I put the last step here at number 12, you can hear how that now really begins to change. And put some other instruments in. And let's say we put this one at 8. You can hear how that's repeating twice before the others reach to the end. And these need not be even numbers. You can put these absolutely anywhere. So we put this at 12. or say 13, you can now hear there's some really very interesting things going on here. Let's put something else in here. Let's put a few rim shots in. If we make that one to end at 11, that will now restart when it reaches 11. So by doing this and by getting things to repeat more and at different times, you can build up some really interesting patterns. This is polymetric, by the way, as opposed to polyrhythmic. In polyrhythmic music, the idea is that you have the bars the same lengths, but the notes with different divisions. In polymetric music, it means that you run concurrent bars, but with different lengths. And both approaches are valid, and by using tuplets, which this allows, you can also do polyrhythmic here as well as polymetric. Now, if I put all these back to 16, you'll be able to hear the difference that's actually made. As you can hear now, everything is now going to 16 steps or 16 semiquavers, as it really is. Everything now has evened out. The great thing is you can use the last step live. So if you have this pattern running and you decide to say, right, well, I fancy having those toms repeat at the end of when it reaches number 7, you can have this effect. Now, here's where I'll explain how the variations work. Each pattern that you store can have these 8 variations, and they can be set to play in particular orders. So I'll start off by making a pattern in variation A. So we'll have kick drum, and have some hats in. Okay, so that's our pattern A. Now, we can copy this into a pattern B or any of the other patterns, but just for sake of argument, I'm going to make a new one from scratch. So, top bass drum. Let's do a slightly different pattern, and we'll have some low toms coming in. Now, when we go to pattern select and to normal play mode when we're not in record, if I hold down pattern A and pattern B, it will now alternate between those 2 variations like this. and we can go on adding until we've used up all 8. So if I now go to C and we put a completely new pattern in, this can be something completely mad and off the top of my head, and really this can be, and I am seriously just making stuff up here. So we now got 3 patterns. If we hold all 3 down, it will now play those three variations in order. Now, if we were just working with something like verse, chorus, middle 8s, we could hold down a verse, we can hold down A and B, and it will just vary, and it will just alternate between those two. If we wanted to cut to C, we could press that in manually, and when it gets to the end of that pattern, it will start C. So we can build up quite a complex song, but as I said earlier, if there was an arrange window here, this would be much easier, and it will probably allow for a lot more in the way of sequencing. All in all, it's an extremely flexible unit. It is expensive at 600 quid, but you get a lot for your money. You get all the samples of all the Roland drum machines, and they're not just samples, they actually use ACB, which is their analog circuit behaviour technology, which means to say that unlike just working with samples, you really can vary each of these instruments and each of these sounds. With that comes a lot of synth samples, a lot of bass samples, a lot of industrial samples, etc, etc, and of course you can put your own in. And the advantage is what this gives you, it's an awful lot of flexibility, because you can build your own kits up from all these other kits, and therefore you can do things in a way that's very difficult to do with something like drum racks, because you can actually alter all of these sounds, you can alter the delays, you can have them at different volumes, and so forth. And so what you actually get is an awful lot of flexibility. Also, unlike the BeatStep Pro, the ability to be able to put substeps or tuplets in, as I know, means to say that you can make some quite interesting, organic, complex patterns. You can also put flams in, and you can actually set the type of flam that you want as well. So all in all, you can get something here that's really very, very flexible. There's also some acoustic sounds in here as well that's worth taking note of, and there's some pure percussion sounds. So you can build up some really, really interesting stuff just using this one bit of kit. Another thing I want to talk about on this machine is the ability to instant record. So if you don't want to go down the line of programming in step by step, you can press instant record, press start, and clear this. It will actually record what you play in live. So each of these instruments comes out with its own button on the front here, and as you can see, when this is activated, only the 11 buttons light up. So and the colours correspond to each of these instruments, so you've got some idea what you're doing. You've also, again, it will record the revolves and record any fills that you've got set in. So clear pattern. I'm going to start with the bass drum, and we're going to go on from here. So go. That's it.